Good morning and welcome to Marjorie's Table. A particular welcome to those of you who are regulars. This is a week that I've opened up the session to anyone who wants to try it. So welcome if you're not one of our regulars too, and welcome if you're watching this on the recording, as so many people do. It'll be public. So as I said before, because it'll be public, I'm saying that out loud again. If you don't want your face to appear beside the poem when I share my screen on the recording, turn off your video and your name might appear, but that's all. So as ever, what we'll do with this half an hour is to do a quick warm-up exercise, which I'll talk you through. We'll look at a poem by one poet, um, and then I'll use the time remaining. I'll give you a couple of craft notes on that poem, and then we'll use the time remaining to do work to two separate prompts in response to that poem. And then I'll show you another poem by the same poet just to see the kind of diversity of work. I mean, it's hard to see that in two poems, but it's better than just the one. And then I'll give you a prompt to take away. I will pop the links to the poem in the chat box if you're live, but don't worry, they'll come out when the links and things come out later this morning. So no need to copy any of it down if you don't want to, because you'll have access to all of that later. So, without further ado, I would like you to write a list of words of whatever comes to mind. And it doesn't matter, you're not going to have to explain how you got there. So, no sort of sense is required at this time of day to the word dawn. Whatever comes for the word dawn, and I'll pop that in the chat box. Okay, now swap and do the word twilight. Whatever comes to mind for twilight. If you're a regular, and even if you're not, if you feel up to it, pop two or three of your favorite words from your two lists into the chat box, and I will read them out. And then I'll choose a selection of those to send on to those watching the recording. And what we're doing is creating a word hoard, or a word pool, or whatever you want to call it. The name doesn't really matter, but a whole body of words. And the idea is to try to use one of those or two of those words in your own writing. For me, it's a particular challenge to try and use someone else's words because often it makes my brain go down pathways that it wouldn't otherwise, or my writing go in places that I wouldn't expect. So if you're up to sharing a few of those words, do. Mine are city lights, smoke screen, inky. I'm watching lots of others come. Thin place, first light, unbridled, beautiful, wild horses, gorgeous, whippoorwill. Whippoorwill, yeah. black grouse, greeting, dim, fading, mystery. If you're live, you'll be able to see all of these popping through your chat box. Choose a couple that you like the sound of, maybe words that you think, oh, that would be interesting. Tenacious, what a beautiful word. I never write with that word. I might try today. Diminishing, beautiful. Fresh washed, stunning. Navy, the shining before black. Lovely, lovely words. So if you're live, have a look at those. If you're watching the recording, I will have sent a set of gifted words from the live recording for you to use as well. But there's stunning words alongside this morning. So I will forget to say it when I give you a prompt, both prompts, but hopefully you've got a list of words and you've stolen a couple others that you like the sound of. Try and use those in your reading this morning, and hopefully it'll take you to places that you wouldn't otherwise go. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to look at the work of Wendell Berry this morning, who I suspect many of you know. I'm just trying to get it to come up to where it should be. We're looking at a poem of his called Before Dark. I'll pop that into the chat box in case you'd like to look at it on your own screen. Sometimes the font is pretty small. The second poem, I should say today, I don't know why the Poetry Foundation does this, but sometimes they're quite big like this, and sometimes it's actually a screenshot of where it appeared in the magazine, the poetry magazine, and so it's very tiny. So the second link I'll definitely put up so you can bring it up yourself. Here we go. I'll read it twice. If you have comments on the poem, it would be lovely for you to pop them into the chat box, and I definitely will read them out before we go. But I'll read it twice. I'll give you a couple of comments on it, and then we'll get writing. Before Dark. From the porch at dusk, I watched a kingfisher wild in flight. He could have only have made for joy. He came down the river, splashing against the water's dimming face like a skipped rock, pausing on down out of sight, passing on down out of sight. And still I could hear the splashes farther and farther away as it grew darker. He came back the same way, dusky as his shadow, sudden beyond the willows. The splashes went on out of hearing. It was dark there. Somewhere the night had accommodated him at the place he was headed for, or where, led by his delight, he came. One more reading. Before Dark. From the porch at dusk, I watched a kingfisher wild in flight. He could only have made for joy. He came down the river, splashing against the water's dimming face like a skipped rock, passing on down out of sight. And still I could hear the splashes farther and farther away as it grew darker. He came back the same day, dusky as his shadow, sudden beyond the willows. The splashes went on out of hearing. It was dark then. Somewhere the night had accommodated him at the place he was headed for, or where, led by his delight, he came. So a couple of quick craft points. Some of you might have heard me talk about how form really helps us. I'm someone who whitters on about form. But often I think it does this thing of holding us in space. So as a reader, when we first approach this poem, we see immediately that it's a 3-line stanza poem, and that feels kind of restful in a way, so we can sink straight into the text of the poem, the story or the narrative of the poem. And for me, that does the job of kind of holding us. And so we almost relax into the story and we're not wondering where we're going. We're not wondering how long the lines are, whether it's going to be all over the place, where we need to look. So I think that's what this 3-line poem does. Why he chooses 3-line poems is up to you to decide, but it will have been a decision. Maybe it's him and the dark and the kingfisher. It's unclear, but that's how he's decided to do it. Sometimes it's more clear when it's couplets or something else. But what's interesting too here for me is that the last line is shortened. And notice for yourself what that does for you, because we see it coming. So we know that something is about to be cut off. And of course, it's a great metaphor for what's happening in the poem, which is he goes out of sight. And yet there's something still to come. We know the poem, the story doesn't end. it ends for us, but it doesn't end. So it's a great visual about what's happening in the poem. But also, we know that that's coming. We know that the end is coming because as we read, our subconscious is watching that that last line is shortened. And so it's a trigger for us that it's coming. And that's interesting. It's an interesting choice. Often poets will hide a kind of kicker last line in a very neatly orderly last line, so you don't see it coming. But here we do. And I think just notice for yourself what that does, because it's useful when we're editing our own work to see whether we want to do it this way or whether we want to hide it in a different pattern. So what I'd like you to do is to it's 43 minutes past. I'll give you 6 or 7 moments. I'd like you to write to a place that you've returned to for joy, whatever that is. Imagined or unimagined, it doesn't matter. You can imagine returning to a place for joy. But I'd like you to write physically, specifically about a place you've gone to back to for joy. It can just be the kitchen for another cup of coffee. It can be as simple as that. It can be a natural place you like, a home, and it doesn't matter, but a place you return to for joy for 6 minutes. And then I'll give, or 7 minutes max, and I'll give you another prompt for the remaining time. And I see that there are comments on the poem. I will definitely read them out before, before we move on to the last poem. Okay. A second prompt, if you choose to do it, you can keep writing on the first prompt or write about something else that strikes you, is the idea of someone stopping doing something they love. Just once, it could be night falls, or it could be forever, it could be age or something else, but someone stopping doing something that they love, whatever that is. I'll pop that in the chat box too. Okay, I'm going to read a couple of the comments about the poem, and then I'll read us a second poem and leave you with a prompt. Um, Lovely comments about the describing of the turquoise flash. Alex says that if this was the view from the porch, I want to live there, which I agree. Um, Kathleen has rightly pointed out that the three-line stanzas are like perfect bites, kind of like a tasting menu of words, but they don't overwhelm. I think you're right, Kathleen, that the white space is doing a lot of work in this poem in terms of giving us that breath and a rhythm that feels almost like twilight, that feels like that restful state. Um, Lines are splashing like a skipped rock. It's beautiful. Led by his delight. Um, Someone very funnily has said it's hard not to think of vampires when you hear the word twilight. So apologies, but yeah, I think that's funny too. Um, and Jenny misread the first stanza as he could only have been made for joy, which is also beautiful. So there we go. Lots of ideas on that poem, and I'm glad you've enjoyed it. Here's an older version of his, which I'll also put in the chat box because, as I say, for some reason, sometimes they're very tiny. I think it's just the older poems. And I'll read you this and leave you with a prompt. Going. Like a city lighted, the body resists the dark. Its studies and complaints burn like windows, the mind watching in the distance. But the weight of the body pulls it down, an irresistible darkening. One by one, its lights go out, an itch somewhere igniting and dwindling like a flare, the windows each suddenly blacking out, each like a bat wakes to the night, turns loose and flies outward and high, black into black, and finally the mind too, released from the last of its beacon, goes. So, going. And I just want you to write about something, the body resisting something, whatever that is, if whether it's because of fear or because you don't want to do something. It could be as simple as getting out of bed in the morning or resisting sleep at night. But the physicality, I think, is really important here, the physicality of resistance in something. So choose a very small example because often those are the most powerful, and write about that. So that's your takeaway prompt. You've got lots of words to try and incorporate, and it's 8 o'clock, right on the dot. So thanks so much for being here with me this morning. It's been a joy to see so many faces I know and some new ones too. So welcome, and I hope to see you next week. Bye for now.